So I feel like Hashem is sending me a very strong message that Mashiach is coming any moment. And it's high time that as a Kohen, I become a lot more familiar with the laws of Tumah and Tahara. In fact, it says that King Chizkiyahu, right, whose father was a Rasha, right? His father was one of the wicked kings of Judah, of Yehuda, and it seems that if you look at the kings, not in all cases, but in many cases, the father was a Rasha, the son was a tzaddik, the next one was a son was a Rasha, the next one was a tzaddik, backwards and forwards. But anyway, what happened with King Chizkiyahu is I think it was King Chizkiyahu, I'm almost sure it was, he reestablished the whole educational system in Eretz Yisrael to the point that it says that all the children that you met in the street were all familiar with all the laws of Tumah Tahara, which is phenomenal, right? Now, obviously, back then in the time of Chizkiyahu HaMelech, you still had the Beis Hamikdash, and so therefore these laws were pertinent. They were still, very much, part and parcel of the life that they were living. But nevertheless, still, if you walk down the street and you ask a child, a Jewish child, a religious Jewish child, to tell you all the laws regarding how to behave inside a shul and when you're allowed to stop and when you're not allowed to stop and so on and so forth, and he's able to rattle off all the laws, that's quite impressive, right? So here they were able to rattle off all the laws of Tumah Tahara. And here I am trying to wrap my head around these laws of Tumah Tahara, and I'm a Kohen. And these things are pertinent to me. As I said, Mashiach must be coming, and that's why Hashem really wants me to get a good grasp on these laws of Tumah Tahara. So,
and I'm a Levi,
you're a Levi,
so I'll be right behind you. Okay.
There you go, hand in hand. So these laws are really important, and when Mashiach comes, I think it was the Chafetz Chaim, if I'm not mistaken, that he had Koyanim learn Maseches Kodshim because he felt like Mashiach's about to come, and we have to know all the laws of, offering up the sacrifices. I mean, what do you think is going to happen? All of a sudden, we're going to come, and Mashiach's going to come, and the Beis Hamikdash is going to be rebuilt, and then everybody's just going to wake up and all of a sudden know the laws. You have to sit and learn. Pasha Kipshutai, simply, you have to sit and learn. So it's good that we're learning these halachas, and Be'ezus Hashem very soon, they'll be very pertinent to us. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to go back a few lines, Daf Chav Daled Amud Aleph, and go through the 8th case that we listed. We started it yesterday, but I want to go over it again today because I want to gain more and more clarity on this. Chazor is always a good thing, and especially when it comes to things that you're not very familiar with, it's important to do that. Okay, I don't know what I did over here to the screen. Okay, hopefully I can see everything here. I don't know what's going on. Why is this here? Oh, there you go. Close. Okay, there you go. I got it. Okay, so Daf Chav Daled Amud Aleph in the art scroll is 24A1. It's about just less than halfway down the line. Haravi'i Bakodesh Posel. Okay, so we said with regards to the different stringencies, we said that with Truma it can only become posel until the 3rd level, to the 3rd degree, but when it comes to Kodesh, it can go to the 4th degree. Okay, so let's just recap quickly the different levels. Let's start with an Avhatuma, okay? That, let's say, is a sheretz, and if it falls into, let's say, the airspace of a vessel, so then that vessel now becomes Rishon L'Tuma. That's first degree. If that anything that touches that vessel becomes a sheni. Anything that touches that becomes a shlishi. Anything that touches that comes a revi. Anything that touches that comes a chamishi. However, when it comes to chulin, we say you don't go past sheni. When it comes to truma, we say you don't go past shlishi. When it comes to kodesh, we say you don't go past revi. And when it comes to the para aduma, you don't go past chamishi. Fine. One thing to bear in mind, the rabbis instituted rabbinically that we say that a person's hands are called sheni. Okay? A person's hands are called sheni. Therefore, what can these hands do? Well, these hands can, unless you've rinsed them, right? If they are considered to be sheni, then if you touch truma, you can make it a shlishi, which makes it invalid. That truma, if it touches something else, nothing happens. But that itself becomes invalid. No problem. Now, if that truma touched something else that was going to be a sacrifice, then it does pass it on, and it becomes a revi. Okay? Those are the things that we have to bear in mind. So now, the question is as follows. Tanya, learned in the Brisa. Rabbi Yasi says, Minayin, from where do we know the Revi'i, that a Revi, Kodesh, when it comes to a fourth degree, with Kodesh, true apostle, that it becomes unfit for consumption. Not that it passes on the Tumah, as we explained yesterday, this idea of Tameh versus Pasul. Tameh means it itself is impure and it can pass it on. Pasul means it itself is unfit, but it does not pass it on. So from where do we know that when it comes to Kodesh, a Revi'i, if it's the fourth degree, that it becomes possible? So he says, V'dinhu, we learn it out from a Kal V'chayma. And this is something that I decided to make a document to be able to share so you can follow and see it with your eyes. Okay? Here you go. So I'm going to explain it outside and then I'm going to explain it inside. Okay? There's an idea of a Tvul Yoim and there's an idea of a Mechusar Kippurim. We explained these all before, but just to recap quickly, when a person becomes impure, there's a purification process. One part of the process is going into the mikvah. Okay? Now, a second part of the process is waiting for sundown. A third part of the process in some cases is you have to wait till the next morning when you bring up your sacrifice, and that completes the purification process. So when it comes, if I can ask people to put themselves on mute,
You have to mute us. You have to mute the group, okay?
Okay, give me a second. I'm going to try to do that. How do I mute everybody? Okay, I'm gonna have to stop the share to mute everybody first. Okay, mute all. There you go. Done. Okay, let me share it again. So when it comes to a Mechusar Kippurim, so what do we say about this Mechusar Kippurim? It means that he's already gone to the mikvah. Right? He's already gone to the mikvah, and sundown has already taken place. However, because he hasn't yet brought his korban, he cannot consume any kodesh. He cannot consume any sacrifices. But what do we say about this Mechusar Kippurim? Truma he can consume. Okay, truma he can consume, but kodesh he cannot consume. However, when it comes to shlishi, let's say a piece of meat. Right? A piece of meat or a piece of wheat, whatever it might be. If it has been touched by a sheni, which makes it a shlishi, is that allowed to be consumed as truma? No, because we said a shlishi by truma is pasul. So, if you say that a Mechusar Kippurim, which can eat truma, is not allowed to consume kodesh, so then something which is a shlishi, which is not allowed to be consumed as truma, certainly the laws around it are going to be even more stringent than the Mechusar Kippurim, right? Or at least as stringent. Now, the Gemara is going to come along and say, therefore, because we have this kal v'chayma, that the Mechusar Kippurim is more kal, and the shlishi is more chamor, So therefore, we'll say that this shlishi can make a revi'i puzzle. Okay, that's the kal v'chomer, which the Gemara won't explicitly ask, but Rashi mentions it in order to be able to then move on to the next few lines of the Gemara, explains what the question of the Gemara is, which is that when a person does a kal v'chomer, well, let's just do the first part inside, and then I'll explain the next part, one part at a time. Okay, let's break this down into bite size. Okay, it says like this: the kal v'chomer is v'dinu. It's a kal v'chomer. Oma mechus kippurim shemuta bitruma. Puzzle b'kodesh if a mechus kippurim, like we said, a guy who still has not yet brought his carbon, but he has been immersed into a mikveh, and the sun has come down, and he's allowed to eat the truma, but he's not allowed to eat the kodesh. So shlishi, when you talk about a shlishi, which we say he cannot eat the truma because not he, but it cannot be consumed as truma. She'posel b'truma, that a shlishi which is unfit for truma. So any din, isn't it logical that what? That sheyase revi l'kodesh, it should become it could make a kodesh into a revi, meaning if this piece of wheat touches a piece of meat, it should now become posel as a revi. Now, before we go any further, let me explain the question that prompts the next part of the Gemara. When I make a kal v'chomer, let me just explain briefly what the logic of a kal v'chomer is. The logic of the kal v'chomer is predicated upon the idea that the Torah doesn't waste words, okay? It doesn't waste words. And therefore, the Torah will leave many things for us to deduce by saying something in a less severe case, and you will logically learn out from that in a more severe case. So I don't have to spell everything out. There's an expression, ten l'chacham v'yechkam oid. Teach, give to a wise man, and he will learn further from it. So if I come along and I tell you a particular law about something which is less severe, less stringent, you will automatically learn something out from that in the more severe case. Okay. Now, when does the kal v'chomer most often occur? It most often occurs when there's some ambiguity about a particular law, right? And we're not sure whether we should make it permissible or forbidden. So we say, if in the more lenient case, it is either permitted or forbidden, right? Excuse me, if in the more lenient case, it is forbidden, then how much more so in the more stringent case, it's going to be forbidden, right? However, what happens if there's an ambiguity where the Torah doesn't tell me whether this is forbidden or not, and I have a kal v'chomer, right? Then, excuse me, let me take that back. If I have a law that tells me that a more lenient case is forbidden, but I also have an explicit reference in the Torah to tell me that the more stringent case is also tamei. So what can I do with this kal v'chomer now? I don't need it to teach me the case that we already know. So there's a machlokes in Maseches Baba Kama between Reb Tarfon and the Rabbanon, whether or not we can come along and say that I can take it a step beyond the stringency that has been mentioned for the less severe case, and learn out and say that we're going to go a step further because this is more stringent. Does that make sense? In other words, let's say I say that if a person runs a stop sign, then we're going to give him a $50 fine, right? But now, if a guy runs a red light, he's also going to get a $50 fine. But I come along and I say I have a kal v'chomer. If you're going to say that by a stop sign you're going to get a fine, how much more so by a red light you're going to get a fine? So I say, if you have this kal v'chomer, I'm going to say the fine isn't $50, the fine is $100. Why? Because kal v'chomer, right? Now I don't need the kal v'chomer to tell me that you're going to get a fine of $50 because that already it says, right? Or let's put it slightly different. If I come along and I say that you run a stop sign, you get a fine of $50. And if you run a red light, you get a fine, but I don't tell you what the fine is. So you say, kal v'chomer, if you're going to say that that by a stop sign, the fine is $50. So certainly by running the red light, you should pay $50. But I say, but I already know you get a fine. I already know that you get a fine because it says so in the law. So therefore, if you're going to make a kal v'chomer, don't say it's just a fine. Don't say it's just $50. Say it's $100. So that's what we're trying to do over here with this kal v'chomer from the Mechusar Kippurim to a Shlishi. If you're going to say that the guy who's a Mechusar Kippurim, right, and we say about him, he can eat Truma, but he can't eat Kodesh, right? So therefore, a Shlishi who cannot even be consumed as Teruma, so we're going to go up a level and we're going to say that not only, we're going to say it's not only because we already know that it's a shlishi, right? But and therefore you can't eat it. But we're going to go and take it a step further, and we're going to say that it makes a revi'i puzzle. Okay, that's the kal v'chomer. Does that make sense? Is that clear for everybody? Okay, so let's continue with the Gemara. So the Gemara is coming along and saying that the reason why we can make this kal v'chomer and go notch up and say that it makes a revi'i b'kodesh, and we don't say that dayoy means that it's enough for the chamor to be as stringent as the law that we're learning it out from, and we say we're willing to go a step further, because we already have a pasuk that tells me this idea of it being that the shlishi lakodesh is not permitted and is unfit. That's what the next lines of the Gemara are coming to teach us. And we've learned shlishi lakodesh b'dat Torah that a shlishi is considered tamei in the case of kodesh from a verse in the Torah. So therefore, revi'i b'kal v'chomer, and that's why the revi'i, right, is going to become puzzle, and we learn this from a kal v'chomer as we just explained. Does everybody understand what I just said? I know everybody's muted, but if I could get just some like a hand up or something to know that everybody is following, so that we can go further. All right, I'm going to assume that people have enough courage to stop me if they didn't understand something. We're going to move on. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to explain this last statement that we made, and it says as follows: Shlishi lakodesh min haTorah minayin. When I say that we already know that shlishi lakodesh is tamei, right? That in a case of a third degree, right, it is tamei, which means that that it is impure. Where do we know this from the Torah? It says in the pasuk, "V'habasa," and the meat, "Asher yiga b'chol tamei lo ye'ochel," that touches anything tamei shall not be eaten. So now, when I say that it touches anything tamei, we're going to go to the thing that is the lowest level that could make something else tamei, and that would be a sheni. So mi loy askinan the nagam sheni, since the verse refers to meat that touches anything tamei. So here, are we not dealing even with the case where the meat touched a sheni? V'ka'amar rachmana, and the pasuk says explicitly lo ye'ochel, it shall not be eaten, and so therefore that teaches me that a shlishi becomes unfit for consumption. So therefore, I don't need the kal v'chomer to teach me this din that a something with kodesh will become a shlishi. So therefore, revi mekal v'chayma, then when we say that a revi is unfit in the case of kodesh, is taught through a kal v'chayma. The kal v'chayma that we mentioned, had the amran, that refers to the kal v'chayma which we mentioned before, which we just mentioned. Okay, that's the end of that shtickle. We're gonna move on to the next case, to the 9th case. Everybody with me? Okay, I'm assuming the answer is yes. Over truma im nitmeis chulu. It says that in the case of truma, if a person's hands become tamei, then the other hand is still tahor. But in the case of kodesh, you've got to immerse them both. Now, I want to ask you for a favor. Please turn back to the Mishnah with me for a moment. Okay, this is on Daf Chof Amud Beis, just for 2 lines, because these 2 lines are going to be important for understanding what's going to come soon. Okay, it says in the Mishnah. We're just going to look at this ninth thing that we've just mentioned, right? What does it say? In other words, how is it taught to us? It says like this: Uba truma, right? This is it's 2, 4, 6 lines. 1 second. 2, 4, 5 lines. 5 lines from the bottom of the Amud. Okay. Uva truma, right? In a case of truma, im nitmeis achas miyadav, if one of his hands become impure, chaverta tahira, the other hand remains tahar. Uba kodesh, but with regards to kodesh, matbil shtehen, you immerse both hands. Now, it's seemingly superfluous to say the next line, shahayad metame es chaverta bakodesh, because one hand makes impure the other hand by kodesh, avolei betruma, but not by truma. Okay, everybody follow that? Okay, so we said with truma, one hand doesn't make the other hand tamei, whereas by kodesh it does. Okay, but how is it expressed? It's expressed that by kodesh you immerse both hands, and then it goes on to say, for one hand makes the other impure. Okay, you're going to see why this is important very soon. Okay, says the Gemara that when we say in our Mishnah that when one hand touches the other, it becomes tamei by kodesh. Yes. In what case is that speaking? Amar Rav Shizvi comes along and says that there's a certain qualification required, that it's bichiburon shanu. Then the Mishnah said that one makes the other impure. It's only when the 2 hands are touching. But if they're not touching, then they do not become tamei. Now, Rashi explains why. If you look at Rashi, right? Rashi says, B'chiburon shanu, masnis in our Mishnah, the Ketoni that taught, Yad metama es chaverta, that one hand makes the other hand impure. La kodesh, for kodesh, kegoin, for example, sheba'oid, shehayad hatmeya, negas l'tahira, that when the hand that is tamei touches the hand that is tahar, haisa tahira negas b'kodesh. The pure hand was at that time touching a piece of meat that is kodesh. Now, why did the Chachamim make this special gezerah? They said, the Gazer Rabbana, says Rashi, the Chachamim were guys that Dilma, perhaps, Osli Laminga Tamea Bakodesh, because he's going to come and the impure hand is going to touch the kodesh. We'll stop there. Let me explain what that means. Here's my hand that is tamei. Here's my hand that is tahar. This hand, which is tahar, is now touching meat. Now, if I touch this hand, if I take this hand and I touch this hand, I'm not worried about this hand becoming tamei. I'm worried that this hand is going to slip and touch the kodesh. That's what I'm worried about. So Reb Shizvi is saying that when the Mishnah says that when it comes to kodesh, one hand makes the other hand tamei, what it means is that I make a special gezerah because I'm worried that my first hand is going to slip and touch the piece of meat that this hand is touching. Now, this hand, right, ordinarily we would say, according to Shizmi's explanation, doesn't become tamei from this hand, right? It doesn't become tamei. And so therefore, the meat shouldn't become tamei. The reason why we're going to say that the meat is going to become tamei is because I'm making a special gezerah because I'm scared that this hand, which is tamei, is going to slip and it's going to touch directly the kodesh. That is Reb Shizmi's explanation of the Mishnah. So far, so good?
Yes.
It's important to bear in mind the reasoning why the Chachamim made this gezerah according to Reb Shizmi. Okay? Because now Abaya is going to come along and question the premise. Okay? Eisre Abaya. So Abaya comes along and challenges Reb Shizmi from the following brisa. It says in a brisa that Yod Neguva, a dry hand, Mitamo Chaverta, makes its counterpart Tamei. Okay? That sounds like what we're saying in our Mishnah, that one hand makes the other hand Tamei. L'tamei kodesh, la kodesh, to make kodesh tamei. Okay, slow down with me. Hands are sheni, right? Let's say hands are sheni. Now, what did we say with regards to kodesh? With regards to kodesh, we said that sheni makes a shlishi what? Tamei. What does a shlishi being tamei mean? It can pass it on to a Revi. So the Revi is going to be what? The Revi is going to be hustle. Okay. So now, in this brisa that we've just mentioned, we said if one dry hand touches the another dry hand with regards to Kodesh, it makes it what? Tamei. Okay? Makes it Tamei, which means that it's making it a shlishi. Avolele truma, but not with truma. Divrei Rabbi, these are the words of Rabbi. Okay, Rabbi Yosi Bar Yehuda, Rabbi Yosi Bar Yehuda turns around and says, I disagree. I agree that one hand that touches the other hand makes it impure, but it's only lifsol. What does it mean, lifsol? Lifsol means to make it a revi. So what it seems that between Rabbi and Rabbi Yosi Bar Yehuda, one says that if I touch with this hand, I make the sheni makes this hand a shlishi, and if this touches the kodesh, it makes it a revi, and therefore the meat is only going to be pasul, right? According to Rabbi, it's this hand is a sheni. I touch this hand, I make it a sheni. And then if I touch now with this hand, the meat, I'm not making it pasul. I'm making it tamei because I made it a shlishi, not a revi. Okay? So far, so good. Before we go on, let me tell you a principle. I explained this a little bit yesterday, but maybe went a bit too fast yesterday. When we talk about the hierarchy of tamei, right, where you have Rishon, Sheni, Shlishi, Revi, and so on, right? There's something that is a bit of an anomaly, and that is that we say that if water touches something which is tamei, you can make it into a Rishon L'tumah, which means that if my hands are tamei, they're a Sheni L'tamei. Anything that touches it is a Shlishi. But what happens if I pour water on my hand? Right? This first water that touches my hand is not shlishi. It goes back to being a rishon. That's a special gezerah. Okay? That this water becomes a rishon. Okay? You understand? The water becomes a rishon. So now, if my hand, let's take this brisa and assume that my hands are wet. Okay? So my first hand is what? Is sheni, and it touches my second hand, which is wet. The water now becomes a what? A rishon. It touches my hand, which becomes a sheni. Now, if my hand touches the piece of meat, it becomes a shlishi. No problem. And that would be a very straightforward case. That would be a straightforward case, and all is good. However, if I tell you that my hand over here is dry, and nevertheless, by touching it with this hand, which is tamei, which is dry, so I touched it, this is a sheni. I touched this hand, which is dry, so there's nothing that would make it into a rishon, and I say it's still a sheni, that's a huge chiddush. That's a huge chiddush. Why would this hand make this hand a sheni? Seemingly, this hand is a sheni. If it touches this hand, it should become a shlishi. So that's a special chiddush. So this is going to form the basis of the question of Abaya to who? To Rav Shizbi. Because Rav Shizbi says that the whole reason why we make both hands tamei is not because there might be water or anything, or because one hand makes the other hand tamei. It's because I'm worried that the first hand might slip and touch the kodesh. That's the reason. So therefore, that would not fit with what we're saying over here in the Brisa, which is making a tremendous chiddush that says that one hand that is dry makes the other hand, which is also dry, a sheni, which would make the kodesh into either a shlishi or a revi. Right? So therefore, what Abaye is asking Rav Shizbi is, why would this Brisa say dry hand? Who cares if it's dry? There's no chiddush by saying it's dry if the only concern I have is that the first hand might slip and touch the kodesh directly. Being a dry hand is completely irrelevant. The fact that the Brisa says that it's a dry hand and makes a point to say that the hand was dry, it must be to teach us a chiddush, and therefore it must be nothing to do with your concern, Rav Shizbi, of the first hand directly touching the kodesh, but rather the reason why it's telling me that it's a dry hand is to tell me this chiddush that a hand that is tamei with regards to kodesh, and it's a sheni, it makes the second hand also into a sheni just like it, which is a huge chiddush. Does that make sense?
Rabbi,
yes.
It sounds to me like they're trying to cover all bases just in case, that should be the case. In other words, that they want to make it tuma, just as a precautionary measure. Am I correct? Because that's
well, yeah, we are taking a special extra measure to bring greater awareness to how careful you have to be with Tumah Tahara with regards to Kodesh. However, the question is, what is the specific concern here? Is the specific concern that the Tamei hand might come to touch the actual Kodesh directly? Or is the concern, right, that we make an extra stringency, that we say that even though ordinarily we wouldn't say that one hand that touches another hand makes it the same level that it is, meaning the sheni would make another sheni, but with regards to kodesh, we make that extra stringency and say that if this hand is impure, when I touch this hand, it also becomes a sheni. That's the question.
That's only for kodesh.
Correct, only for kodesh. We're only talking about kodesh.
If the tower hand was touching truma, and the other hand was sheni, comes along and touches, it doesn't do anything.
We say that the second hand, that's what it says in the Mishnah, that with truma, the second hand doesn't become tamei from the first hand. You just have to wash the first hand if you're going to touch that thing directly with your first hand. But yes, it wouldn't, in the case of truma, one hand would not become tamei from the other hand.
So the only reason why he's saying is that we're dealing with kodesh, and that's the reason why.
That's correct.
And you're doing this as a stringency to ensure that you are more careful.
That's correct.
Okay,
that's correct. So let's do it. Let's do it inside. So Eisve Abaya. So Abaya asks, challenges Rav Shizvi, says in the Brisa, Yod Neguva, dry hand, Metaber Chaver. It makes its other hand tamei letamei lekodesh, to make kodesh that it touches tamei avoloi letruma, but not in the case of truma. That if the second hand touches truma, it's not going to become tamei. That's Divrei Rebbe, that he says that it's going to become what? A shlishi, which by kodesh is tamei. But Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda says that it's actually not letame, but rather lifsol, that is going to become a revi. That's a machlokas in this brisa. Avaloi letame, not to make it tamei. Now, here is where we actually ask the question of Rav Shizvi. That's the premise. Now we're going to ask the question. So now, now it's all well if you say that the stringency of one hand making the other applies even when they're not joined, right? That's the special chiddush, right, of saying in this brisa that the hand was dry. Right? Because even if they're not joined together, because I'm worried, right, that because I say that one hand, in other words, when I say neguva, when I say attached, there's two parts to the attached. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to follow. There's two parts to the attached. Number one part to the attached is that I'm actually touching one hand on the other. And the other part to the attached means while the second hand is touching kodesh. But if I say that they're not attached, what I mean is that we're talking about where the second hand is not touching kodesh. That second hand is not touching kodesh at all. It might come to touch kodesh. So what I'm saying now, when it's not touching kodesh, that one hand makes the other hand tamei. What I'm saying is it makes it into a sheni. And even though it's not wet, because if it were wet, then we said the special principle would kick in, and that would make the water a rishon. And so therefore, obviously, the hand which is touching the water becomes a sheni. We're saying even when it's dry, there's a special stringency when it comes to kodesh that the first hand makes the second hand a sheni. So that's the chiddush. But that would only make sense if you're talking about in a case where two hands are not touching. So you don't have this concern of the first hand possibly touching the kodesh directly. But elai amrat b'chiburon ein. But if I'm going to say like Rav Shizvi, that what? That the only time that we make this gezerah, that both hands are tamei, right, is only when the hands are connected, because I'm worried about the first hand touching the kodesh, then my rebusa denguva. In this brisa, what's the novelty of Rebbe saying that this decree applies even when the hands are dry? There's no chiddush over here, right? There's no chiddush over here because ultimately I'm not concerned about water, no water. I'm worried about the first hand touching the kodesh directly. So therefore, this brisa couldn't accord with what you're saying, Rav Shizvi. Now the Gemara, talking about the same idea, looked at a machlekes between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yechanan. Itma, so many take out the word nami because it's not a proof, it's just stating another law. Itma, it was taught. Ama Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish says, Loishanu elayadai. When I come along and I say that one hand makes the second hand a sheni, right? This is only regards to my hand. Here we turn over to Daf Chav Daled Amud Beis. Aval Yad Chaverei Loi. The Chachamim didn't make a gezerah to say that if my tamei hand touches somebody else's tamei hand, that it becomes a sheni, that it becomes tamei. Right? I only made that gezerah with my own hands. When one hand touches the other hand with regards to kodesh, right, that it becomes a sheni. Now, Rabbi Yochanan says, Echad yodai ve'echad yad chaveroi. When the Mishnah comes along and says that one hand makes the other hand tamei, it applies both to his second hand or the hand of somebody else, his friend. So if I come along and I say hello, shalom aleichem, stick out my hand, and I touch your hand, I make it a sheni with regards to kodesh. Okay? So now,
Rabbi.
Yeah.
Your comment about making hands sheni l'tuma, that's a general principle.
No. That's the general principle when a person is not mindful. So if I went to the mikveh this morning, right, and ever since I left the mikvah, I'm mindful of my hands. My hands are no longer sheni, right? Now, if you touched me, and I know for a fact that you're tahar, right? That you are
Covered.
let's say that you are a sheni, right? I know that you're a sheni. So when it comes to truma, when it comes to truma, my hand that touched your hand will become a shlishi, because my hand in and of itself has been to the mikveh already. So I'm no longer a sheni, and I'm keeping a very a great awareness to make sure that it doesn't become a sheni, right? The general principle about sheni is when, because we say yadayim askoniyos, your hands are busy, touching, moving everywhere, and so you're not concentrating where they are. So therefore, the default position is there sheni. But here we're talking about when this person is careful, he does know that his hands are tar, right? But now somebody whose hands, right, are for sure a sheni, right? Or even if not for sure sheni, but they are a sheni. If they touch, even if you're right, even if it's just stam, a guy who wasn't careful, so his hands are sheni. If they touch my hand, they become a shlishi, right? That's normal. But what we're saying is that because we're talking about kodesh, your hand touching my hand will make my hand into a sheni, not into a shlishi. Okay? And the difference will be if my hand touches something else, which touches something else. Okay? You following?
So it's only for Kodesh, your hands considered sheni. If it's not
Correct.
for Kodesh, anything else, it just follows the normal.
That's correct. That's correct. That's correct. So he says, but this stringency applies only to a hand that was touched by that hand which was originally tameh. And when we say that, it's livso avaloy tameh. When we say that one hand makes the other hand tameh, it means that the second hand has the ability to make the kodesh unfit, but not to make it tameh. 1 second, please. One second. Yeah, this was only touched by the hand that was originally tummy. Leave so up a little tummy. Okay, I'm a little confused, but I'm not going to confuse everybody else here. Let's just keep going for a minute, and hopefully, Hashem will open up my eyes, and it'll all become clear in a minute. Right, the Gemara, and so Rabbi Yochanan says, "Mimai, how do I know that the first hand has the capacity to make somebody else's hand tamei, not like you, Reish Lakish, who says it's only your own hand that you make tamei." So he says, "Midiktani seifa," because as I pointed out before, when we went back to the Mishnah to look at the Mishnah, what does it say after it says that you have to immerse your hands into the mikvah? It says, "Shahayad metameh chaverta lakodesh avalei letruma." Right? Instead of just leaving it as with regards to kodesh, you have to put both hands in the mikvah, right? You have to tovel both hands, which would automatically tell me that one hand makes the other impure. The Mishnah goes on to tell me that one hand makes the other hand tameh, right? Hasu lamali. Why did the Tana of the Mishnah have to say this extra clause? Why didn't he just suffice it to say that you immerse both hands in the mikvah? And I would automatically understand that the reason why you need to put both hands into the mikvah, it's because one makes the other impure. So he says, Right? Why do I need more? Hatanale Resha. We already said this in the first clause by saying that with regard to truma, you only have to wash one hand, but with regards to kodesh, you have to immerse both hands into the mikvah. So why do I need the second clause? Isn't it from here a proof to come along and include that you can make your hand, the hand of your friend, also tamei, like you can make your second hand tamei. So once Rabbi Yechanan put forth this reasoning for why he says that you can even make your friend's hand tamei, v'af Reish Lakish Hadarbai. Reish Lakish also subsequently retracted his earlier view, and he came to agree that what? That a hand can contaminate even someone else's hand, as we see from the following that the Gemara now says. The Amar Rabbi Yena, Amar Rabbi Ami, this is just a line to tell us that Reish Lakish retracted. He said in the name Amar Reish Lakish, he said in the name of Reish Lakish, that Echad Yadei, Vechad Yad Chaverai, that our Mishnah, the stringency in our Mishnah refers even whether it's to his own hand or to the hand of his friend. And the stringency applies only to Ba'osei Hayad, to the hand that was touched by the original hand. Lifts, right? And lifsal avalele tamei. And when we say that one hand makes another hand tamei, it means that the second hand has the capacity to make kodesh unfit, but not to make it tamei, which means that we had a machlokes in the brisa between Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Yehuda. Rebbe was the one who said that you make it tamei, right? Which means that the second hand becomes a sheni, and therefore the meat that it touches becomes a shlishi. But Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Yehuda says that no, the second hand makes the third hand a shlishi, right? And therefore it's only lifsal and not letame. And so it seems that Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbi follow the view of Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda. Now, going a little bit further, because still I'm going to just mute everybody. If you need to comment or ask any questions, just unmute yourself. Continuing on the same topic, saying v'lifso avolei l'tamei tanoihi. Okay. V'lifso avolei l'tamei tanoihi. This discussion, whether touching somebody else's hand or touching you, or even touching your own hand, then this hand then going on to touch the kodesh will only make it puzzle and not tamei. In other words, is the hand a sheni, or is the hand that you're going to touch be only a shlishi? We say this is a machlekes of the Tanoim. The Tanan, because we learned in the Mishnah, it says as follows: Kol hapoisel b'truma, it's a principle that anything that makes truma unfit, which means to say through contact, which means, what did we say truma is? Truma is going to go up until shlishi, right? It doesn't go past shlishi. So therefore, if a sheni makes something to be unfit for truma, so that same thing, metame yedayim liyes shnias, it makes the hands to also be a sheni. It also makes the hands to be a sheni. Okay, again, anything that can touch truma and make it shlishi, which means anything that is a sheni that can touch truma and make it a shlishi, if it touches hands, it makes the hands sheni. Now, the yad metame chaverta, and a hand makes its counterpart tamei. Divrei Rabbi Yeshua, these are the words of Rabbi Yeshua. V'chachamim emrim, but the chachamim say yedayim shnias heim, the hands are shnias. Ve'ein sheni oiseh sheni, but one sheni cannot make another sheni when it comes to chulin. That's what the Chachamim say, okay? My love, the Gemara, my love, Sheni Hu Deloy Ovid, are the Chachamim saying that it only doesn't make one hand another a sheni, like a sheni cannot make another a sheni, hashlishi of it, but it can make the second hand into a shlishi. So what then would come out is that according to Rabbi Shua, the first hand gives the second hand the capacity to make kodesh into a tameh, because it seems that Rabbi Yeshua doesn't make this distinction that Chachamim are making. So therefore it seems that Rabbi Yeshua believes that when one hand touches the other hand, it makes the other hand into a sheni by kodesh. Again, let me just explain what I'm saying. We said a principle that anything that can make truma into a shlishi, right, makes hands into a sheni. So let's play that out. This hand is a sheni. If it touches truma, it makes it into a shlishi. So then I'm going to say that if this hand touches this hand, it makes it into a sheni by kodesh, right? That's what Rabbi Shua's opinion seems to be. The Chachamim are saying that what? The Chachamim are saying that Yadayim are shniyos, hands are shniyos, ve'ein oiseh, ve'ein sheni, oiseh sheni b'chulin. Sheni cannot make another sheni by chulin. So the Gemara wants to learn from that it cannot make the hand into another hand into a sheni, but it can make it into a shlishi. If that's the case, then it seems that what? That if the first hand gives the second, So we show that this machlekes is really a machlekes of the Tanoim. So the Gemara comes along and says, who says, maybe you're coming to try and make a deal from the fact that the Chachamim said that a sheni cannot make something else into a sheni, and therefore you're trying to learn from that they're saying implicitly that it makes it a shlishi. So the Gemara says, Dilma loy sheni ovid v'loy shlishi. Maybe the first hand doesn't make the second hand not a sheni or a shlishi. So therefore, we have no proof from here that it's a machlekes of Tanoim where the one hand gives the other hand the ability to render tameh, or only to render it pasul. And for the Gemara, Ella ihani tanoi. Rather, the issue of whether the second hand can make the kodesh into tameh or only make it into pasul depends on a dispute between the following Tanaim, a different brisa, where you have a machlekes of the Tanaim. The Tanya is taught in a brisa. Yad neguva metames haverta, a dry hand that is tameh makes its counterpart tameh. L'tameh b'kodesh, to make kodesh that it touches tameh, avaloi truma, but not truma. Divrei Rabbi, these are the words of Rabbi. Rabbi Yesi, but Rabbi Huda Oisei Yad. Stringency applies only to that hand, which was originally tamei. Lifsel avalei l'tamei, to make the second hand, to give the second hand the ability to make kodesh pasul, but not to make it tamei. So here you have a clear machlekes between Rabbi and Rabbi Yesi bar Rabbi Huda, which is a machlekes tanoim, and the machlekes seems to be whether or not the first hand makes the second hand sheni, or whether the first hand makes the second hand a shlishi. That's the end of this shtickle Gemara. Does everybody understand? The end got a little bit confusing for me, but I think, ultimately what we've done is we tried to go to one Mishnah and say the machlekes. There's a machlekes on Tanoim whether one hand makes the other hand a sheni or shlishi, but we ultimately said that wasn't good enough because it wasn't conclusive, because the what you were trying to imply from the words of the Chachamim were not so simple. So therefore we went back to the brisa that we mentioned before, and we said it's from that brisa we know that there's a machlekes Tanoim whether or not that our saying that one hand makes the other hand impure means that it makes it a sheni or it makes it a shlishi with regards to kodesh. That is the end of this shtickle. I think that I want to stop here for today because I'm still processing what I went through because I still have some questions. But does anybody else have any questions on the shtickle Gemara? Or any comments or any enlightenment? Sometimes if you just hear your own voice too much, you're not sure whether you understood it or not. But when you hear back from somebody else what you said, you can see whether what you said made sense or not. So if somebody wants to try and share what they understood, that would be very helpful for me and probably for everybody else. Yeah, but you're muted, so if you can unmute yourself. One second. Can you? I need you.
Okay. No, for review process.
Yeah.
Where did we end? Because I want to again review it all to be able to then be better prepared for the next session. So where did we finally end?
I'm sorry.
I want to review what we just studied. So what was the what page are we on for the conclusion of this particular series of Gemaras?
So we're up to 24b2 in the Art Scroll.
Okay.
And so we finished discussing the 9th case that the Mishnah discussed.
What's the 9th case? Okay, good. All right. That's what I need. I apologize.
We finished the 9th case. And ultimately, what we've said is that there was an extra stringency by Kodesh over Truma in that when we say by Truma that one hand is Tameh, we do not go along and say that the second hand is Tameh. And therefore, all you would need to do in the case of Truma is to wash the first hand, right? Now, when we say with regards to Kodesh that the second hand becomes Tameh, right? We're saying the second hand is the second hand becomes Tameh only with regards to Kodesh. What does that mean? Remember the difference between the words Tameh and Pasul, okay? Tameh means it passes it forward. Pasul means it becomes unfit but does not pass it forward. So when I say by Truma that this hand, right, this hand that became Tameh, let's say it's Sheni, right? At best, what it will do to my second hand is make it a Shlishi. But if my second hand touches Truma, nothing's going to happen to the Truma because with Truma it doesn't go past Shlishi. It's only by Kodesh that it goes past Shlishi, right? So now, when I come along and I say that there's an extra stringency by Kodesh to say that both hands have to go into the mikvah, which means to say that this second hand can make something else tameh, right? Which means the second hand that touched this hand, the second hand which was touched by the original hand, now can go ahead and make something else tameh. The whole discussion that we went through is trying to decipher whether we mean that it makes this piece of meat pasul or tameh. What's it going to depend on? It's going to depend on whether this second hand became a sheni or this second hand became a shlishi. That was the whole discussion. And we said, it's a machlikas tanoim, because our Mishnah wasn't very clear about what happens to the second hand. It just said that you need to immerse it. You just need to immerse it into the mikvah. And then we had like an aside to say that there was a discussion between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yechanan whether a person can make somebody else's hands tameh. And they ultimately both agreed that when it comes to Kodesh, if one hand touches somebody else's hand, it can also make that other person tameh. But that was an aside. But anyway, that's in short, what we tried to discuss today. I hope it was understood.
So then tomorrow we begin the new Mishnah on 20.
Tomorrow we're going to do the 10th case, right? Which
Okay.
is, and then we will be doing the Mishnah. We will be doing the Mishnah
Okay.
tomorrow. Yeah. So we're just going to finish off the last two cases of the
Okay.
10th and the 11th stringency. All right.
Great.
Have a wonderful day.
Good. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Rabbi,
Bless.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Rest, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.